Excited about today's show, and good to have you with us for DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. One of the reasons why I'm excited, Stephen Lassen, one of the guys that puts together the Athlon Sports college football preview, he's going to be with us today. I was a part of something really fun on behalf of DawgNation this week. I get to tell you about that today. I'm really excited. Big announcement for our friends at Kroger. I can't wait to tell you about this fun contest for you to be a part of. So we're actually very loaded, and in addition to that, we've got some really good content there as well, including what I think is a pretty interesting look at the Georgia-Alabama game coming up on September 19th between the Dogs and the Crimson Tide. And as I've been saying the entire time, there's a lot at stake for both these teams on both sides. This isn't just a referendum on Georgia proving it's ready to win on the biggest stage in college football. There's a lot for Alabama to prove as well. In fact, we'll begin by talking about that today. Really glad to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I was telling our video audience just a moment ago before we began the show that I'm really excited about what we're going to do today. I'm holding in my hands the Athlon Sports college football preview. This is the SEC preview, and if you're watching in video, you can obviously see this. This is not a free ad necessarily, but y'all know that I love the college football preview magazines. I have always enjoyed that, sitting by the pool, reading these things, doing all that kind of stuff. One of the guys who puts the Athlon magazine together, Stephen Lassen, is going to join us here in a few minutes. Some fun stuff to get into with him. We'll even kind of put Athlon under the microscope, spotlight a bit for some of the things that it said about Florida. We'll do that coming up. Also, before we're done today, I had a chance to be a part of something really fun and special this week on behalf of DawgNation. A great experience. I'll tell you about that. I think that's going to be kind of a cool thing for us to brag about a little bit, including one of our partners who was a great help for us in all of this. We'll do that in just a bit. Huge announcement about a big fun contest that we're doing a couple of minutes there as well. So just a lot today that's going to be great and fun, and we'll do that with you over the course of our time. Good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Before that, let me talk a little bit about the biggest game on deck for the upcoming season for Georgia. It's September 19th in Tuscaloosa. It's Georgia traveling to play Alabama. Now, here is something that we kind of know to be true about this game. For Georgia coach Kirby Smart, who came close to winning a national championship in 2017, but ultimately fell just short at the hands of the Alabama Crimson Tide, and then came close in 2018 to winning back-to-back SEC championships. Once again, fell just short at the hands of the Alabama Crimson Tide. There is a degree of pressure that Smart faces in a game like this, and really the entire Georgia program, when you have been close but haven't gotten over the hump. And when the same team has beaten you in high-profile spots a couple of times, there's just a little bit of extra pressure to get that done and beat that opponent when you play them the next time. That's what Georgia finds itself in September. Now, September's not revenge for December or January. We understand that in college football. But in terms of proving that Georgia's ready to take the next step, going to a place like Tuscaloosa, I believe they've only lost twice there since 2015. Am I right about that? It's a big-time, tough place to go win. From that standpoint, there'd be a lot for Georgia to prove if it does win, and frankly, there'd be a lot of naysayers to the program if they don't. Let me give you an example of this. This wasn't said on DawgNation Daily. This was said, you may have heard us have Ryan Fowler on the show before, radio host in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Ryan sent me this audio a couple of years ago. Brad Edwards is an ESPN analyst. He goes on the radio in Tuscaloosa. It said something about Kirby Smart that I think is relevant for our conversation today. Now, understand this. This is Edwards playing to a Tuscaloosa audience, so maybe he's turning up the volume on this opinion just a little bit. But if you want to know what Smart has at stake going to Tuscaloosa to play Alabama in 2020, think back to what people were saying about him as recently as 2018 to give you a little context for that. Here is the ESPN analyst, Brad Edwards.
I think Kirby needs to win a national championship in the next 2 or 3 years in order to keep this going. I'm not saying it completely falls apart if he doesn't, but right now he's benefiting from a lot of good publicity because people are making the Saban comparisons, and they're saying, look what he's done. He's come in, had a lot of success in year 2. He's already tearing it up on the recruiting trail, and all that stuff through 2 years matches up. He's got to continue to recruit at that top 3 level every single year. But more importantly, he's got to win a national championship soon in order for those comparisons to continue.
So Edwards says back in 2018, Kirby's got to make sure he maintains his status as a guy that produces these top 3 recruiting class. We obviously know that has happened. Georgia's been the number 1 class in 2 of the last 3 years, out-recruited Alabama in 2 of the last 3 years. So in terms of maintaining the recruiting success that was discussed in 2018, no problem for Georgia on that front. But because Georgia has recruited as well as it has, it may only put more pressure on Smart to get over the hump and win a game like this. Brad Edwards, I think, crystallized that opinion when he says, Smart's got to win a national championship soon. This is not Georgia fans putting that pressure on Smart, restless as they are, as we've discussed before, but the title drought that UGA has kind of suffered through these last few decades. This is national media person saying, hey, if you're going to recruit this well, if you're going to be at the doorstep of winning a championship, at a certain point in time, you've got to cross that threshold, step into that room, and announce your presence on a big stage. That's what Smart faces when he goes to Tuscaloosa this September in a roundabout way. I think we all kind of understand that. However, let me make a point again that I've made before. While that's true for Smart on September the 19th against Alabama, it is also true for the other coach on the other sideline, Alabama's Nick Saban. Because just like for Georgia and for Smart in particular, there's potentially just a litany of critics ready to step up to the plate and say, see, I told you so. Smart not getting it done on the big stage. He can recruit, but does he develop? He can recruit, but does he win these games? He can do this, but does he do that? Just the same way that people will be ready to say that about Kirby Smart. If he loses against Alabama in September, there will also be people ready to step up and say some things about Nick Saban there as well. Saban also has pressure on him as he gets ready to face another big-time opponent, Georgia coming into Bryant-Denny Stadium. Let me give you an example that proves this point. So Paul Feinbaum, you know him, was on the ESPN show Get Up a little earlier this week, and the subject of college football came up, and I guess they were just previewing Alabama. That's how this topic came up. And because of Saban's age, the host, Mike Greenberg, asked Paul Feinbaum, hey, do you think that time is kind of running out on Nick Saban to get it done? And listen to Paul Feinbaum here, and I do think this illustrates what I said a moment ago, that Nick Saban in September against Georgia has just as much pressure on him in that big game as Kirby Smart has against the opponent that he hasn't yet beaten, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Paul Feinbaum's own words are proof of this.
Nick Saban will be 69 later this year. He is considered by many, myself included, to be the greatest college football coach of all time. But to put that over the top, he needs one more championship. Is this year his best chance to get it?
69 may not sound old in our business or if you're running for president, but it is old in terms of championship head football coaches. And I don't want this to sound blasphemous, but time is running out on Nick Saban. It's been 2 years since he's won a national championship, 2 seasons. That's a long time. He hasn't gone that far or that long at Alabama since the early part of his career there. And I think this is his best team. The season is unknown at this point. However, there are many other programs catching up a little bit. It's no longer, you can no longer make a blanket statement. Nick Saban's going to win a bunch of national championships. I think he needs to win one this year, or that hourglass is going to become very dangerous for him.
And by the way, that dog barking is not in our DawgNation World Headquarters studios. The only animal we allow to be in our studio is our Eddie, our unofficial DawgNation Daily mascot. That's our Laura Rutledge's dog that's barking incessantly during that clip. But what you hear from Feinbaum, I think, paints the picture that I described a moment ago. If Kirby Smart loses, there's a whole bunch of folks ready to say, can't win the big one. But if Nick Saban loses to Georgia in September, those same critics will turn their eye in the direction of Saban, and they'll be ready to say, maybe the game has passed Nick Saban by. All of a sudden, he will have lost his most recent game to Georgia, have lost his most recent game to Clemson, have lost his most recent game to Auburn, will have lost his most recent game to LSU. The idea that Saban is the top coach in the sport, that Alabama's the top program in the sport, if they lose to Georgia in September, all of a sudden you're hard-pressed to find evidence of that still being true. If you're Nick Saban at a very different stage of his career than Kirby Smart, you are white-knuckled holding on, trying to maintain your perch at the top of college football. Kirby Smart has a chance to knock him off of that come September. Smart's got pressure to get the job done, but the point here is Nick Saban's got that same pressure as well. In these great colossal showdowns in college football, you want the stakes to be high. And for Georgia and Alabama in September, the stakes are high for both teams, both coaches, and that's a game that I cannot wait to see. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. And, of course, it's good to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, at least coming soon again on Twitter. Radio Noon on Athlon Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Google, Spotify. WorldFamousDawgNation.com. Just glad to have you connecting with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And huge thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp for making all this possible. And frankly, big thanks to them for also the work they do on behalf of so many of the people who watch and listen to our show each and every day. As I said before, they are your source for Georgia divorce. And the fact of the matter is, here in the state of Georgia, with people who connect with us on DawgNation Daily, divorce is a reality for many of you. You've either been through it, you find yourself on the verge about to go through it, and you're worried. You're worried about your finances. You're worried about the relationship you have with your children. You're worried about a number of things that maybe you can't even put into words. And deep down, you know what I'm saying is true, that the way to make all of this better, the way to make your situation whole again, family-wise, financially-wise, everything else, is to have a strong advocate on your side. Merriweather and Tharp is that. It begins with a free initial phone consultation. It can also be furthered with free resources like blog posts and podcasts and things like that. But ultimately, it's about putting them to work for you to be the strong advocate you need on your side. They do fearless, tireless work. That's why I recommend my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. I briefly alluded to this a moment ago, and I'll get to it here in a moment. Big announcement today for us. Really fun giveaway we're going to be doing in honor of the dads who are checking in with us here on the program here today. I'll tell you more about that coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let me continue to focus in on what's going on at Georgia right now. Voluntary workouts. We're kind of coming across that threshold of coronavirus lockdown where no one was allowed to do anything, and for a long time we wondered if the world would ever look normal again. It's not quite normal again yet, but players back on campus, workouts taking place, even if it doesn't involve football right now or doesn't involve, coaching and practice and things like that. It at least feels a little bit more normal. And when Kirby Smart last week spent some time with reporters looking back on kind of how Georgia managed all this time, no spring practice, no G-Day, weird circumstances, lockdown, preventing recruiting at the moment. But when Smart looked at his own team, it certainly seems like Smart feels pretty good about how UGA has come through all of this. The ultimate results for the season, we won't know that for a while. But in terms of managing the adversity of being away from each other and being away from coaches, being off campus, Smart seems to be fairly confident that UGA's managed this okay. Here's what Smart said about that last week.
Every kid to a T has done a tremendous job. I mean, the first level of commitment in handling of adversity would be our team GPA, to be over 3.0 for the first time ever as a football team. Incredible for those guys to come back, finish strong. Before we went on spring break, we didn't really know this was coming, and we had the highest markers of the semester that we've ever had. We were on our way to our best semester ever, and we had made a kind of overall concerted effort to improve that area, and our goal was a team GPA of 3.0. Well, we went on spring break hitting our marks to do that, and then we finished it with all the news and all the transition of going online with that, and that was an incredible semester. That's the first adversity they came over. Then as far as workouts, a lot of our guys, you guys have known, have posted workouts, and there's been a lot of workouts that you haven't seen that they've sent to each other among position groups, and that's the first sign that there's a level of commitment that you need to be successful. And I'm looking forward to getting those guys back so they can do it here.
I think anyone that's ever led an organization, especially a big organization, big business, big charity, big sports entity, whatever else, I think there's something to be said for finding a way to survive during adversity, but also I think really strong leaders in the best situations can also find a way to thrive during adversity, because the kind of thing like the coronavirus lockdown we've all dealt with, in a way, will demonstrate the strength of the various organizations in terms of how do you manage when put through a stress test? How do you manage when put into unfortunate circumstances? And the best will, I believe, be made better because of this. And certainly if you're UGA, you hope you have the infrastructure in place to be able to survive all of that. Thus far, it certainly seems like Smart's, for someone who, by the way, is notorious for wanting full control over everything, it kind of seems like he's a little bit comfortable having not been in full control of this disease, this virus, and kind of okay with where his team is for right now. A nice thought to consider as we get ready for the start of practices at some point in time in July, which we'll find out more about in the time to come. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And before we bring on Stephen Lasson from Athlon Sports, talk to him about the upcoming season and the Athlon Sports College Football Preview, let me take a moment to shout out my friends at Kroger for what I think is really fun. One of the things I've told you all before, and hopefully you've seen this from me before on video, is that I'm a big believer that one of the coolest things we can do is sort of pass down the experience of being a Georgia fan through the generations. I went to Georgia games with my grandfather growing up, my dad, kind of much the same way. And now I'm lucky enough to sometimes be in Athens with my own kids. I'm working a lot, so I don't get a chance to always be with them. But certainly the experience that was given to me from my dad, my grandfather, I'm now able to give to my own kids there as well. It's just a cool thing to be able to do. And as we head towards Father's Day, it's kind of fun to think about some of those memories there as well. And that's what Kroger wants to kind of push and do a little bit more of there too. Go to DawgNation.com. You can find the link right there at the top of the page for the tab. Get in there, and Kroger's inviting you to do this. Share your great memory of being a UGA fan, either you with your own children, your dad with you, your grandfather with you, whatever else. It's a picture, it's a video. There's instructions there how to submit that. We're going to take those submissions between now and June the 16th. That's Tuesday. Then after that, the voting is going to begin to decide the winner. Someone, courtesy of our friends at Kroger, is going to receive a gas grill and a $50 Kroger gift card. What a cool Father's Day giveaway this is from our friends at Kroger. There's more details at DawgNation.com. Please go there, and please be a part of this. This is a lot of fun. We want to see your photos. We want to see your videos celebrating being a UGA fan with your dad, or you as a dad with your kids, grandfather, whatever else. A lot of different ways for you to participate. You can find out more at DawgNation.com, and who knows? You might be a lucky winner of a gas grill and a $50 gift card courtesy of our friends at Kroger. Check that out at DawgNation.com. I've got a big announcement later on about a cool thing that we were able to do at DawgNation this week. Can't wait to tell you about that. We'll get to that later. Also, some interesting news around the rest of the SEC as well. Some of it involving UGA recruiting. That's coming up too. For now, though, for more on the upcoming season, what we've read so far in the Athlon Sports College Football Preview, let's talk to our buddy Steven Lasson. And I say it all the time, I do love the preview magazines. Among my favorite is certainly the Athlon Sports College Football Preview. In fact, I've got the SEC magazine right here in my hands. It's got the Alabama Crimson Tide receiver Devontae Smith on the cover, but we won't hold that against our next guest. Steven Lasson here from Athlon Sports. Steven, thanks for spending some time with us. Appreciate the good hard work during the offseason to give us some preseason content there as well, and I'm sure you are like me, very much excited about the fact that it seems like college football is on its way back, and at least in some form or fashion, the sport that we love is going to be back on the field again, it would appear.
Absolutely. It's great to talk to you once again. It has been an interesting offseason, trying to put out a preseason magazine with the uncertainty of the season kind of hanging over us as we were going through the production process. It was the most difficult and most challenging magazine that we've had to put together in my time at Athlon Sports. But as you mentioned, I feel like the season is on track to get started on time. So I'm excited to talk about it with you. And I should say, I have the Georgia edition of George Pickens close to my desk here that I use throughout the day. So it's a really nice cover, shameless plug.
So maybe I should just blame my own newsstand for having the wrong magazine then, if that's the case, right?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that the Georgia, edition with George Pickens on the cover isn't close by there. We'll have to look into that.
No doubt about that. Well, speaking of Georgia, one of the things we talked about earlier this week, when you look at the magazine, kind of some of the stuff that's been said, obviously, big storyline is what's going to happen with Todd Monken, the new offensive coordinator, and potential offensive changes. And what I said on the show, Steven, is, I keep my old magazines as well. And if you go back and thumb through last year's Athlon Sports magazine, you'll see some similar sentences about last year's offensive coordinator, James Coley, of, hey, Coley's going to banish the conservative play calling. They're going to open up the passing game. Last year it would have been said about Jake Fromm. Now it's probably Jamie Newman, although I guess there's some chance that we end up talking about JT Daniels before all this is done. But it's new offensive coordinator Todd Monken for sure. And what I said on the show, Steven, is I think for some Georgia fans, it sort of feels like we've been around this block before in terms of a new offensive coordinator bringing some needed change to the Georgia offense. As someone who's not inside the bubble of DawgNation and inside the bubble of UGA fandom here, how sure are you that Todd Monken's going to provide that extra offensive dimension that I think most of us would say that UGA probably needs?
I would feel very confident in what Todd Monken brings to the program. We saw this when he was an offensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. Dynamic passing offense that pushed the ball downfield, but also still utilize the running game. Oklahoma State, in his time as offensive coordinator, consistently among the best in the Big 12 in offense. Then he goes to Southern Miss, and as a head coach, their entire program in terms of wins and offensive production got better. And then you add in the NFL experience to that as well. He's got a really strong resume. And I think for Georgia, look at what LSU did last season and seeing what that type of offense can do for your program. You add in more big playability on offense. And I think, let's be honest, too, the passing game more than ever dominates college football. And shifting a little bit to that, I think can only help Georgia go from top, 5 to national championship good. The question is going to be this offseason. No spring practice. It looks like Georgia and every other team will have some sort of limited summer and fall camp. So I think year one, it could be a little bit, kind of touch and go, a little bit bumpy because of the lack of off season. But long term, I really like this hire. I think it's one of the better coordinator hires of the offseason.
We will get to Athlon's feelings on Florida here in a moment, but if we stipulate for a moment that Florida, after having been the top 10 the last couple of years, stands to be that kind of team again, one of the things we've said is maybe the presence of Florida as, and mileage may vary in terms of how people view this next sentence, but as a threat to UGA, maybe that motivates Georgia to make some changes that otherwise Smart might have felt not quite so that weren't quite so imperative to make. Because let's face it, being conservative almost worked for Smart in 2017, and to a degree almost worked for him in 2018 there as well. It's easy to talk yourself into sometimes staying the way that you are, maintaining what you've kind of done before. It's kind of a comfort zone level. But if Florida really is building something that's respectable under Dan Mullen, then maybe the presence of the Gators in the East might motivate Georgia to kind of swing for the fences offensively in a way that thus far Smart just hasn't quite felt the need to necessarily have to do.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, I kind of mentioned it a minute ago, but if I was Kirby Smart, watching what LSU did last season and going from, kind of middle of the pack in the SEC on offense to having the nation's best offense, a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback, and seeing what it can do for your program, I think you had to look at some type of changes. And, I think credit to Kirby Smart in just the big picture sense. I think you realize that, changes needed to be made. Georgia could not keep doing what it was doing if it wanted to win a national championship. When you're in the SEC with Alabama, LSU, Florida, A&M, Auburn, you're looking for any kind of small edge. And with the passing game and the rules on defense, you've got to be able to open it up and be a little bit more aggressive on offense. So I think it's going to work out well for Georgia. And I think if we're looking at a team that reminds me a lot of what LSU did last season, to me it's Georgia. Certainly transfer quarterback, but really it's about offensive schematic changes that this team is making.
All right, so the next question, I'm going to go ahead and warn you, is a little bit of a homerish question, but I want you to indulge me nonetheless. So Athlon ranks Florida ahead of Georgia, and a lot of Georgia fans have seen some version of this during the offseason. Great respect for Dan Mullen as play caller. There are some analysts who've even called him the best offensive mind in the sport, whatever. And the general sense that some people seem to have is, while Kirby Smart may be better at acquiring talent than Dan Mullen is, he's, I think, unquestionably a better recruiter, that Mullen may prove to be a better, developer of that talent there at Florida. However, the one thing that I think some Georgia fans would say in response to that, and here's where I'm curious about your opinion, we've seen a lot of head-to-head battles between Smart and Mullen. Go back to 2017 when Mullen was still the coach at Mississippi State, came to into Athens, lost 31-3. Now, it may seem normal for Georgia to beat Mississippi State, but the truth is this was year 2 of Kirby Smart. Dogs were only a 3-point favorite at home that day against Mississippi State, yet won in a blowout. Won by 19 the following year in Jacksonville when Mullen became the head coach of Florida. A little closer last year, but frankly, Georgia was never really in danger of losing that game. I guess here's my question, Stephen. For those that would say that Mullen is such a good game coach that it's eventually going to shine through at Florida, why hasn't that mattered more in moments in which Mullen's coached head-to-head against Smart in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we look at coach rankings within the SEC, I think certainly it's close between Mullen, Smart, Orgeron, and Jimbo Fisher to be that next best coach behind Nick Saban. And I think specifically to Dan Mullen, I think you have to give him a lot of credit for what he did at Mississippi State. It is a difficult job. He turned it into a consistent bowl team. I think I would agree with the thought that he's very good at maximizing talent, especially on offense, developing quarterbacks. But you're right. I think in order to be considered one of the top coaches in college football going forward, at some point he is going to have to beat Georgia. You look at the track record on offense, the track record versus Kirby Smart as a defensive coordinator. That's a big-time missing piece on the resume for Dan Mullen. And not to mention, Florida has gotten significantly better over the last 2 years. So, I think as we go forward, that's the big remaining question. And I think the other question that remains to be seen is, Florida right now is not recruiting at the same level as Georgia is. Can Dan Mullen get Florida's recruiting a little bit better so that where maybe the talent level isn't as wide and maybe you get some more even matchups between the two? But certainly that's a missing piece on his resume and something that we talked about a lot this offseason when trying to compare Florida versus Georgia for the SEC East title.
I want to try to squeeze in two more things before we let you go. In your preseason top 10 in Athlon Sports, Alabama's number 2, highest-rated team in the SEC. Obviously replacing Tua Tagovailoa and really losing 2 receivers, which I think is a pretty big deal there as well. Dylan Moses is back. Obviously Najee Harris is back. There's some talent coming back, in Moses' case coming back from an injury. How much of a debate was there about where Alabama belongs and if they were truly justified as being at the top of the SEC? What were the internal discussions like about that?
We really didn't have much debate about the SEC's best team. We really think it's Alabama. Certainly losing Tua is a big deal, but Mac Jones played well at the end of the season against Auburn and against Michigan. Certainly the mistakes against Auburn were magnified, but I thought all things considered, under the spotlight, he played well. Then you look at what Alabama brings back on the offensive line. We think it's the best offensive line in college football. Najee Harris, one of the best running backs. I mean, they should be able to line up and pound opposing teams this year. Surprisingly, their defense was not the defense we're used to seeing under Nick Saban. But I think Dylan Moses getting back is huge. He's the quarterback of that defense, and we've seen under Nick Saban how valuable those inside linebacker kind of senior leadership, junior leadership can be at that position. So I also think Alabama getting Georgia at home was significant. Early in the season where Georgia is probably still working out the kinks on offense, that factored into our discussion as well.
All right, let me finish with this. When we've had guys like yourself on the show over the years, especially the last couple of years, national writers, magazine writers, the one thing we've kind of heard as a pretty consistent theme is that the preseason prognostication business had gotten a little stale, had gotten a little boring. Clemson rubber stamp in the ACC, Alabama a bit of a rubber stamp in the SEC. There just weren't a lot of room for surprise teams. I think we would all acknowledge that the overwhelming amount of talent has been congregated in fewer programs maybe than ever before, and that sometimes made predictions boring. But last year, LSU, to a degree, kind of came out of nowhere. They were a preseason top 10 team, but in terms of winning the national championship, most people would not have predicted them to do that. Because of what Orgeron did a year ago, has that made the preseason prediction stuff, especially in the SEC, a little bit more fun and maybe opening the door for a surprise team and maybe the possibility that the same 4 teams making the college football playoff over and over again, that it doesn't quite have to be so paint by numbers when it comes to the preseason predictions? Did it feel a little different this year coming up with some of this stuff because of that?
Yeah, it really did. I'm glad you asked about that because I feel like the SEC West, even though we like Alabama, is maybe a little bit more wide open than we're used to seeing because Texas A&M we think is a little bit better. Auburn is always interesting. LSU just won the SEC West. But I think the quarterback discussion in the SEC or uncertainty really makes this year fascinating because you have the top 6 teams or so in the league all have some sort of uncertainty, question mark, a guy who needs to step up, Kyle Trask, Kellen Mond. So, yeah, I think the SEC is potentially a little bit more wide open or interesting interesting than we're used to seeing. It used to be just Alabama, but you throw those top 6 teams in there, combined with some of the crossover games we get this year, I think it's going to be one of the more interesting and maybe unpredictable seasons in the SEC that I can remember. I think nationally, I still think it's Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and then probably Oregon in the Pac-12, but certainly I think Oregon a step behind those other teams nationally.
Well, as you mentioned before, it was not easy getting the Athlon Sports College Football Preview to newsstands, but you guys did a great job of doing it. It's fun for me to read. I'm lucky enough to have a swimming pool in my neighborhood that's open, so I'm able to kind of be out there enjoying some of this. I got to bring my own chair, but nonetheless, I can still sit out there and read the magazine by the pool, which is a rite of passage for me in the summer. So, Stephen, thanks for the work that you've done to do that. And for folks who maybe want to find this themselves, what are all the various ways they can connect with the magazine and all the other stuff that Athlon Sports is doing?
Absolutely. AthlonSports.com. We've got college football digital content pretty much every day to keep the college football news cycle going. If you go to our website, AthlonSports.com, at the very top, there's a Buy Your Magazine link there. And it takes you to our online store, can order it, have it shipped to you. The official on-sale date was June 2nd, so it should be out everywhere in the newsstand as well.
Well, Stephen, great to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp today. Hope you have a great day, a great week, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again very soon.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me on.
All right, good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, really good stuff from Stephen Lassen there from Athlon Sports. I do enjoy the magazine. I like the debate. I like the conversation. And one quick thing on what Stephen was talking about. You mentioned all the various coaches in consideration for that kind of group of, who do you rank where in terms of the SEC coaches. Obviously on this show, for easily understandable reasons, we talk a lot about Kirby Smart. But in terms of some of the love that Dan Mullen gets, one of the names that Stephen mentioned, I think, is a lot of this comes at the expense of, and that's Jimbo Fisher. Fisher's won a national championship. Dan Mullen credited with developing these quarterbacks, but how many first-round quarterbacks is Jimbo Fisher responsible for? Now, he's got some pressure on him this year to get something out of Kellen Mond, but let's not forget Jimbo in this kind of conversation there as well, especially in a comparison to Dan Mullen for the guy getting the most out of the talent that he has. Watch out for Jimbo Fisher in that regard. And listen, sometimes being an influential member of the broadcast media also requires a degree of humility. And while we were talking about LSU, obviously I had to hold back on the personal congratulations of saying that I picked LSU to win the SEC West last year. That doesn't really fit in that conversation. Sometimes you have to do that as a influential member of the media. You have to sort of let your own correct opinions not necessarily be brought to the forefront. So just understand that there on that front, because I did pick LSU to win the West a year ago. Nonetheless, we'll move on to our SEC Through here. And I got a really cool thing to tell you about in a moment when the SEC Through is done. I was very proud to be able to do something on behalf of DawgNation, one of our great partners this week. We'll tell you more about that coming up in a moment. For now, you may have seen the news yesterday that SEC Media Days, one of the biggest events of the college football summer, is now going to go virtual for this year. A couple things about this that I thought were interesting. First of all, for the most part, SEC Media Days really is just for media. That's been proven over and over again. This is kind of an inside type deal. However, I do think the SEC likes the event. And I think the SEC is curious to see if they can grow it beyond what it currently is. When the league made the announcement yesterday that it's going to be held virtually because of obviously the impact of the coronavirus, it was very interesting to see very, very early on in that statement, immediately letting it be known that the event will return to its normal format next year. In other words, the league likes this. I don't know if this will ever cross over and be kind of a mainstream thing for fans, but I think the league is kind of curious to see if it can grow beyond just something that sweaty, overweight reporters go to. And so we'll see how it grows in the future. But for now, I don't think the SEC is any less interested in the event. They just can't do it this year in the normal format because right now there's too much unknown about the coronavirus. The other thing that I'll say about this is I would not take the alteration of the SEC Media Day schedule to be any kind of indication that we're off schedule for getting football back. I think these are very, very different things. There's really nothing about SEC Media Days that can't be done virtually. When you can do it in person and when you can make it a spectacle, the SEC wants to. But in terms of the actual crux of the event, guys with microphones sticking in the face of coaches and players, you can do that via video teleconference as well as you can do anything else. So it just made sense to do that this way this year. I think Media Days is back next year to being the same thing it's been before. And frankly, I think the season is still on track to taking place. This was just a fairly easy event to alter because the truth is the coaches and players probably don't like it at all. So they were probably pretty happy about this. So this year, Media Days will be held virtually. This impacts the media a lot more than it impacts fans. A couple of recruiting notes to get to here for a moment. We're coming up on the 13th, a couple days away, heading towards Saturday. Romello Brinson, 4-star wide receiver, is set to make his college announcement. He's been putting that out on Twitter there a little bit. Let's show the finalist here for him. You got Miami, which a lot of folks seem to think is a pretty big player here. Also LSU, Alabama, A&M, and I guess Georgia is considered a pretty big player here there as well. There's a lot of chatter about Georgia on this front. We'll have Jeff Sintel on the show on Friday. We'll ask him directly about Romello Brinson. But Brinson coming up on an announcement this weekend, and obviously Georgia is in the center of that. He does go to Northwestern High School down there, so Miami thought to be a pretty big player on all this there as well. Something else from a recruiting standpoint we haven't really mentioned I want to get to, Xavier Sori, really good-looking linebacking prospect, speaking of the state of Florida there as well. He has recently come out with his top 5. That does include Georgia. Everything I've been led to believe says that Georgia's a pretty big-time player in the pursuit for Sori here. You also see Auburn there. You see Florida, LSU, and Alabama. So pretty good-looking top 5 there from Xavier Sori. For the most part, these are the usual suspects which you would expect to see. In the aftermath of Barrett Carter choosing Clemson, Sori was always going to be one of those names we started hearing more about, and certainly it seems like Georgia's pretty heavily in the mix for him. A couple other quick SEC stories to get through here for a moment. Actually, let me just do one more. So Grant Loy was the quarterback at Bowling Green. Bowling Green, a program in the MAC. Bowling Green's actually had some pretty good quarterbacks over the years, but that's not important here. Loy, as a graduate transfer, is on his way to Auburn. Now, obviously, Bo Nix is the starting quarterback for Auburn. That's not expected to change, but you may remember Joey Gatewood, after losing the quarterback battle to Nix, decided to transfer to Kentucky. So Auburn has not really had much depth beyond Nix, has not really had much of a backup quarterback to speak of. In fact, late in the season last year, they may have been forced to play a non-quarterback at the position had Nix gotten hurt. So Loy going there for depth reasons, and this is probably a pretty good pickup for Auburn for that very same thing, a guy that's played some. There's also, I guess, a chance based on some of the reporting that I saw that maybe Loy might try a different position here and there, but Auburn needs a backup quarterback, and it looks like it's turned to the Mid-American Conference for that. Grant Loy from Bowling Green on his way to Auburn. He's a graduate transfer quarterback. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, I want to brag on one of our partners here for a moment. You may remember our friends at Sock Fancy. That's a subscription-based sock service. The co-founder and CEO is Stefan Lewinger. He's a UGA grad. And they transformed their typical sock manufacturing for masks, the mask that so many of us are wearing around. I don't wear one when I'm on the show, but I wear one frequently. This is a Sock Fancy mask right here. I'll put it on. You can't really hear me if I have it on, but nonetheless, that's the kind of mask that Sock Fancy created. And for every mask they've sold during this time, they also wanted to give one away as well. They've had a goal to give away 100,000 during this period, and they teamed up with us, and we sold some for them, and we were able to give some away and really direct where the giveaway went to. And one of the things that we said here around DawgNation is, well, where would we want to give away masks if we had a chance to do that? And the idea of daycares came up for me because of all the people, having to send their kids to daycare as our state gets back to work here, as essential work continues to be ongoing. And we said, well, daycares need masks. Many of them can't afford them. So what if we step up, team up with Sock Fancy, and give away a bunch of masks to a local daycare here in the Atlanta area? We were able to do that this week. Let me let you see this quick video, or if you're listening radio podcast, you can hear this. Stefan Lewinger, me, at Carrington Academy here in the Metro Atlanta area, giving away 1,000 masks. This was fun. Take a look at this.
We've seen the world greatly impacted by the coronavirus. Some of us have longer hair than we used to, more facial hair than we used to, but in a lot of ways, there's also a more serious impact there as well. Businesses, the economy have suffered. Yet throughout all of this, we've also seen a number of businesses step to the forefront and provide leadership about paving a better way towards a better society and dealing with the coronavirus challenge as we're dealing with it right now. Obviously, at DawgNation, we've been really proud to tell the story of Sock Fancy. I've got Stefan Lewinger here right now, the founder and CEO of Sock Fancy, and a guy that's been doing great work throughout this entire time to supply the world with something it needs a whole lot more of right now, the mask that we're wearing at the very moment. This is from Sock Fancy. Stephen, a lot of people are aware Sock Fancy is a subscription-based sock service, and we love the socks. They're always fun to wear, and yet during this time, you guys have kind of changed your manufacturing efforts, and you've kind of gone about and done things a little bit different. For the folks that maybe don't remember, remind folks what Sock Fancy's been doing throughout all of this.
Yeah, so we converted most of our production capacity over to making masks. We knew that PPE was real hard to get a hold of in the community, and we knew that we had an opportunity to kind of make that happen. So we started producing masks. We started putting them on our website, and we saw a really great response from them. And we've been able to donate a mask for every mask that we sell.
That's exactly right. For those of you that maybe didn't realize that, for every mask that Sock Fancy's been selling, they've been also giving one away as well. It's a perfect one-for-one model, and it's been an incredibly generous act. And here as a part of Dog Nation, we're really excited to give away some of those today. So, Stephen, what do you say we get ready to go ahead and do that?
Let's do it. Can't wait.
So when Stephen from Sock Fancy came to us and said, hey, who do you guys want to partner with and donate some masks to, we thought about it at Dog Nation and said, hey, what's the kind of industry, what's the kind of place in the world we could really impact? And the thing that came to our mind is daycare, because when you see essential work being done throughout the entire time the coronavirus lockdown has gone on, and as our economy tries to restart, the one thing that you realize is that the daycare workers who take care of the children, the people getting back to work, that's as essential as anything that gets done. And around the Atlanta area, really nobody doing a better job of that than our friends here at Carrington Academy. We got some proud of Carrington Academy students with us right here. And Stephen, I know we've got a big thing we want to do for Carrington Academy today. So without further ado, why don't you make a presentation?
Awesome. Yeah, we're really excited that with the help of Brandon and Dog Nation that we've been able to secure over 1,000 masks for delivery and donation to the Carrington Academy.
How about a hand for that, guys? 1,000 masks. How about that? And Stephen, I know for you guys who have been doing so much work to get these masks in the hands of people, it's a great feeling when you're able to deliver some and able to see the product that you made. And by the way, these Sock Fancy masks are very comfortable and very well made. It's got to be a great feeling to put those in the hands of people, right?
It is. I mean, it's really great when you have the opportunity to kind of put your business to work for the community like we've been able to do here, and partnering with the right giveaway partners and all of those things are so important for us, and it feels really good to be able to give back to the community.
So Carrington Academy, on behalf of Dog Nation and on behalf of Sock Fancy, please accept our donation of 1,000 masks. I know that you guys will use them well as you take care of the kids, as folks get back to work here around the state of Georgia. Thanks for all you're doing, and we appreciate the chance to be with you here today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So a huge thanks to all of you that purchased a mask from our friends at Sock Fancy when we were running that promotion a couple of weeks ago. Because of what you did, because of what Sock Fancy was able to do, we here at Dog Nation able to give away 1,000 masks to our friends at Carrington Academy, and 100,000 masks over the course of the entire time will be donated by Sock Fancy. What an awesome, awesome thing. Stefan's a great guy, really good company, great work, and Dog Nation getting a chance to be a small part of that was a really fun thing. So to all of you who participated, that was a really great thing to be able to see. Something else that was great to see on video, I'll show this to you, Dale McGee, the Georgia running backs coach. We see this time of year, little fellowship, his running back crew hanging out there at his home. A lot of those guys look to be in really good shape. Fun to see that running back core back on the field this upcoming season. Nice to see Dale McGee hosting them at his home last night. Nice stuff there. By the way, Gator Hater Updater now stands 1,321 days. Long time since Florida's beaten Georgia. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. And as I said before, man, awesome. Sock Fancy, great company, great looks on the faces of the kids and the workers of the daycare this week to be able to deliver 1,000 masks. A lot of these daycares, and I was told this, listen, that's a huge strain on their bottom line. These daycares do not run with, massive profit margins as it is. And when you're forced to, because of you want to take good care of the people in your care, when you're forced to wear a mask, that becomes a pretty big expense for a lot of these organizations. And to be able to give away 1,000 of those because of all of you who bought masks from Sock Fancy when we ran the promotion a couple of weeks ago, that is awesome to be able to consider. Just really, really incredible. Very, very exciting about all of that. All right, we got some time for your comments as we roll into our R.S. Andrews cool down. And Of course, don't forget, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews can do all that for you. Air conditioning goes out. Listen, that's not good news. If you're afraid yours might go out, just get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Get that from our friends at R.S. Andrews. It just costs $99. Find out more on that at rsandrews.com. Or water heater goes out. Many cases can be replaced the same day. Plumbing stuff, you obviously can't let that go by the wayside. That's a disaster waiting to happen. R.S. Andrews can give you peace of mind about all of that. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Now, let me get some comments pulled up here. It'll take me a second. I'll go YouTube first, and then we'll see what the folks over there on the YouTube side of things are doing today. And we can talk about whatever we want to from today's program or anything going on around UGA. You want to do some recruiting stuff, we can do that there as well ahead of Jeff Sintel's appearance on the program tomorrow. Cody Ledoux looks like he's checking out. Brady Pest Management says, thoughts on what UGA released yesterday for fan attendance. Personally, I will not attend if masks are required. Honestly, it'd be hard for me to wear a mask for 4 hours as well. I mean, not saying I shouldn't, but it'd be hard to do. I need to look more into that because I read some of what's out there. I need to read more of it. Obviously, the fact that you've got a wide range of possibilities, I still take as a good sign. And the notion that by the time we get to, I guess, mid-July is when they're going to kind of revisit more of this, the fact that the world could seem more accommodating for the return of something a little closer to normal, I still take as a good sign. Honestly, I've said the entire time that I'll take football however I can get it, and if it's inconvenient for me, I'll suffer through that this year because of how much our society needs it. Here's where I start to feel a little bit like a hypocrite because now that we've kind of seemingly gotten the games back, now I'm, kind of sitting around finding out, well, how close can we get the games to look like college football the way we've normally come to expect it? I think it's a fair question. I mean, I think all of us will be a little bit weirded out if it's not the way we've come to expect. In fact, just the notion that we might be restricted from attending. I'll give you a quick example of this. My son heard that the NASCAR race in Talladega was going to have fans. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. They're going to have 5,000 fans. And he was like, hey, Daddy, can we go to this? And so I didn't say we could, but I was going to look into it and see, well, could we figure out a way to get some of these tickets going to be out there? And in reading about it, now I didn't look that hard, so maybe there was a chance to do this, but it certainly seemed like that the 5,000 tickets that were going to be available were only going to be available to a certain number of people. People had already basically pre-purchased, and the technology they were going to use for that, at least to my eyes, made it seem really, really difficult to resell them. So I was thinking, wow, you don't see much of this in life where, and because of all the secondary ticket markets and things like that exist, pretty much if you want to go to an event you're willing to spend to get there, you can pretty much go to anything you want to. But now we have a situation where the tickets could be so restrictive that not only, you can't even really buy them in some cases. So I think, that's really weird for me there as well, in addition to what it might feel like to be inside the stadium and, the idea that you might have to wear a mask or, something along those lines. And do you need one outdoors and all the other stuff that the scientists have to figure out? The whole notion that someone like me, who's just taken it as a given that he'll be at every, UGA game, might be restricted from being there, either because, in your case, maybe, the tickets just aren't even able to be purchased, even on the secondary market, or because of, whatever else. I mean, I will admit, I want this to be more normal than not, but I am still, much like you, Matt, watching very closely on this. As far as, let me just leave. Jalen Jackson says, do you think that Cam's brother, I think is it Jalen Newton? Is that the right name? But Cam's brother from Howard University did transfer to Auburn. He says, do you think he can overtake Bo Nix? Kind of weird they took him as a grad transfer. He set records at Howard, and Nix is not living up to his 5-star status. So when I read about Newton when he first transferred, I guess there is a chance, and this is based on the reports, I don't know much about this one way or another, but based on the reports that I had read, they are strongly considering a different position for Cam Newton's brother. I'm sorry, I don't remember what his first name is, but they're strongly considering a different position for him. That I believe the guy coming in from Bowling Green is thought to be the number 2 quarterback here. And I do think there's a chance that if Newton plays, I mean, if he gets on the field for Auburn, on the basis of what I've read, it may be at a different position. You're right. He had a very good career. I understand at Howard, but I'm thinking they're going a little bit different direction with him. Stacy Goebel says, for the life of me, I do not understand why or how the national media sees Florida as a contender for the playoff. Please explain. And Stacy, I asked that question directly to Stephen Lassen a moment ago. Stephen's a guy that I like, and I respect his writing, and certainly I like the Athlon publication. But as I said to him, the notion that Mullen's going to outcoach Kirby along his way to having a better team, why isn't there any evidence of that somewhere in the past? And, listen, I think for the most part that is still an unanswerable question. And that's not for me to say to Stacy or anybody else that I think that Georgia is this impervious juggernaut that's going to steamroll its way to a national championship. I think that Georgia has got a good number of unanswered questions, and there are a great number of games for UGA that would be incredibly tough. In Alabama in September, that's obviously a very tough game for Georgia to win, and it's very fair to question UGA's ability to do that, just given the fact that Georgia has let leads slip away against Alabama the last couple of times that Kirby Smart's coached against them. Georgia's not currently scheduled to play LSU, but let's say through some series of events, Georgia ends up playing LSU in the SEC championship game. Georgia has gotten shellacked the last two times it's gone up against Ed Orgeron. It would be very fair to ask, is Georgia ready for LSU if those two teams played again? There are some legit unanswered questions facing Georgia and a few opponents that would seem to bring out the worst in UGA for whatever reason. But I'm with Stacey. I don't believe that Florida's one of them. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everything is easy for Georgia, but Florida is not as difficult as the media makes it out to be for UGA. As far as why is that happening, I've speculated about this before, that if Florida had won the East 3 years in a row and Georgia was nipping at Florida's heels, the same things being said about Florida now would be said about Georgia. There is money in touting the big program return to glory. We said this yesterday. The ESPN ranks its top programs, coaching jobs. Florida is one of its tier 1 jobs, according to Adam Rittenberg, the writer. Well, if you're a tier 1 college football program, but you haven't really been on the national stage in more than a decade, then obviously there's a good number of Florida fans who are thirsty for that return. And telling them that it's about to happen will always be a profitable line of thought. And that doesn't make the national media nefarious or sinister or anything else. It's just incentives. People respond to incentives. Touting Florida is incentivized. If Georgia was in the same spot, touting Georgia would be incentivized. In fact, you can kind of go back before Kirby had proven anything in 2016, 2017, and you can see some examples of people showing some love to him even back then. And maybe it was their authentic opinion. Maybe it was just, kind of a sensible business plan. Either way, it's just kind of always going to exist out there. Noah Shelton says Georgia would get revenge on LSU if they played, so maybe that will happen. JC does bring a pretty good point. The last two times we beat Alabama was in their house. It can happen. I was there at both those games, 02 and 07. We actually talked about the 02 game on the show last week after Pat Dye had passed away. What I did not realize about that 02 game until I kind of looked a little bit more at it, because that was the famous Pat Dye Man Enough game. That was the first time that Georgia had ever beaten Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Now, there's a little bit of an asterisk to that because for a number of years, Alabama pretty much only played big games at Legion Field in Birmingham. But nonetheless, it's still factually true. So, yeah, Georgia's won its last two trips to Tuscaloosa in 02 and 07. So that's probably pretty important to remember. I will say that, if it works out well and it's a normal situation, as much as it pains me to admit, I do think the Tuscaloosa experience is a really good one. I think it's a pretty good stadium. I think it's a pretty good university community. I love the way the kind of whole town is seemingly built around Bryant-Denny Stadium. You basically spill out of the stadium into like the downtown area there in Tuscaloosa. As much as it pains me to admit, I don't hate Tuscaloosa as a college venue. I don't hate Bryant-Denny Stadium as a place to watch college football. I do have to admit that. I'm going to try to pull up these Facebook comments. For whatever reason, this Facebook has been slow for me all week. But let's see if I can get these pulled up. And we got about still a good 5 minutes left. We'll get a few more of your comments. Have some fun here on a Thursday. Hope all of you are doing really well and enjoying your summer in some form or fashion. Don't forget to go to DawgNation.com, by the way, and sign up to be a part of our Father's Day giveaway, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. Lynn Johnson Shipman on the subject of some weird tan lines on your face that show up during these summer things, there's definitely a lot of that, especially a place like Bryant-Denny. If you're sitting way up at the top of the stadium, you get some big-time sun way up there. The worst I think we've seen on that front the last couple of years was actually in Columbia in 2018 for the Georgia-South Carolina game. We've had some pretty hot games, had some really hot games a year ago. I think in the last couple of years for me, though, the single hottest may have been the Georgia-South Carolina game. So much so that I think for what was otherwise a top 20 matchup, South Carolina was ranked in that game, one of the bigger home games of the year for Gamecocks fans. It was so hot that day in the upper reaches of the stadium that you essentially had fans staying away. Stadium was not full, I believe, due to the heat. So, yeah, you see that early in the season for sure. Matt Rukavina says, as far as Mullen is concerned, he could barely make it competitive versus the worst Georgia offense in a decade. Riders need to get serious. I believe that's true. Georgia was not good offensively a year ago, and in the stretch, both just before, just after the Florida game, the Georgia offense was not good at all. Remember, ugly game against Kentucky just before Florida, bad game against A&M, at least for the most part offensively, just after Florida. And in the midst of that, Georgia goes into Jacksonville, lights the Gators up on third down, especially. Really on first and second down, Georgia was not great shakes offensively against Florida a year ago either, just very, very successful on third down. But the idea that on money downs, when you're trying to get off the field, when they weren't able to do that, if you couldn't have more success against that Georgia offense last year, I got news for you. Even if Jamie Newman isn't quite as advertised or Todd Monken isn't quite as advertised, the notion that a school like Georgia is going to have 4 consecutive games of fewer than 50% passing or whatever the story was a year ago, that's just not likely for Georgia no matter what the scenario is. So if Florida couldn't get it done a year ago, I think it's very fair to say, how do you expect to get it done when Georgia gets better offensively? Even if it's only a little bit better offensively, I think that's a fair question to ask. Richard Smith says 5 minutes. We'll see. Try to be kind of on time here today. Josiah Hurd says riders do their rankings on surface level facts, returning starters, coaches. Not sure they do too much digging, thinking when making these rankings. That may be true. Maybe true. Barakas Mills says how many fans will be in the stands week 3. We've debated this a million times. Barakas, I think it's a great question. For someone like me that wants 2 things, I want Georgia to have as much success as it can have, and I want college football to be as normal as it can be. At a certain point in time, those interests intersect. There's a little bit of overlap there. It stands to reason it might be easier to beat Alabama in an empty stadium, but if it's empty, then I'm not there either, maybe, right? So it's like, how do you do all of that? I think the game being week 3 as opposed to week 1 is interesting. I can say with full confidence, I have no idea what the overall attendance situation looks like, but it stands to reason that there's a better chance of a full stadium in week 3 than week 1. Would you agree with that? Plus, you can just see those Alabama people working behind the scenes, right? I mean, you want to talk about some dirty pool. This notion that Alabama's trying to pull some political strings to get the full stadium. Maybe quietly, Georgia's trying to pull the opposite strings to say, hey, it's too soon. Listen, this is social distancing. That could get very, very interesting. I also think if you look at the Georgia schedule overall, that in terms of if we assume that later is better in terms of attendance, think about this for a moment as I try to type with one hand here. Most of the Georgia games where you want full stadiums for are later in the year. Let's see if we I'll try to give you some facts on this. So if we stipulate for a moment, this is just guessing. This is all just guesswork. But if we stipulate for a moment that you're not doing full stadiums at the beginning of the year, but you might do it later on. Georgia does not need a full stadium for East Tennessee State. You could play that game with 15,000 fans. Honestly, not that many Georgia fans are excited about that anyway. The Virginia games in Atlanta, once again, one way or another, that's not necessarily that big of a deal. I look forward to going to the game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, but it's on the road for Alabama. Then it's September 26th for Louisiana Monroe. Saturday, October 3rd against Vanderbilt. Once again, even if you were socially distant for that one, not the end of the world necessarily, but Saturday, October 10th. Can you get me into a full stadium or close to it for Auburn coming to Georgia on October the 10th. Then, of course, you got the Georgia-Florida game. Then you got Tennessee coming to Athens in November. Those are the games on the home slate for Georgia where you really want those fans. You can make a case that a slower return to full stadiums in one way might benefit Georgia, but I still want the stadium to look as normal as it can. Bill Rogers says Kirby's already hit him with the flea flicker, talking about Dan Mullen. Now he needs to hit him in the mouth, a little physicality off the top of the game. Maybe so. Lynn Johnson Shipman also talking about those tickets in Athens. I always get the north side and the south side confused, but there's obviously the one side, kind of more where like the students are, the band, where, that sun, those day games, it just comes beating down. The big money donors are always on the other side because they got shade coming from the press box and from the really it's the luxury suites that provide the shade. That's always been the nicer place to sit. Big time money, long time donors sitting in those spots. Joel Moody says, do you think having the Auburn game earlier helps or hurts Georgia? I know that we've dominated them most of the last decade. Yeah, so Joel, my thought on this would be, I would never voluntarily change anything that I was dominating. Georgia, as you said, had been dominating Auburn. And so therefore, I'm not interested in doing anything different with a game that's working out for me as well as Georgia-Auburn has worked out for Georgia. Even predating Kirby Smart, Georgia's just dominated that series. Why make any changes to it whatsoever? Now that the game will be played in October, honestly, I don't think it's that different. I don't. I do think the one thing I would be a little bit aware of is, to go back to the schedule just for a moment, you've got a little bit of space between the Georgia-Alabama game and the Georgia-Auburn game. You've got 2 weeks worth of space. Really, it'll be 3 weeks by the time you get to the game against Auburn. But, Auburn coming relatively shortly after having played Alabama is maybe a little bit of a disadvantage for UGA, but that's only to a slight degree. So ultimately, even though I was not in favor of the change, it's probably not changing the outcome of the game that much, but playing another relatively tough game just a couple of weeks after having played what is probably the toughest game of the season, maybe a little bit of a challenge for UGA, but ultimately not a insurmountable challenge either. Let's see what else is going on. Y'all, I ain't getting into the coronavirus talk. I can just tell you, I promise you that. I am not getting into that stuff. Even after all these years. Yeah, thank you, Breda. South side is the press box side. You always get north and south confused. By the way, also a lot of people say that Georgia Stadium's oddly configured anyway, because you normally think about north and south being end zones. Georgia has east and west end zones and north and south stands, but that's just kind of the way it's always been. Thank you, Breda, for that, though. I always get those confused. You'd think after all these years I'd finally have that memorized. All right, what else? Let's see. Yeah, like I said, I'm not doing mask talk. I'm not doing coronavirus talk. I'm leaving that alone. Phil Rogers says, this Georgia team can win them all, playing one game at a time, no slip-ups, like last year's Carolina game. Phil, I believe you're right about that. I'd love to see it play out, but I believe you may be right. Devin Knight says, let me get Devin. And then we're going to get ready to go. Sorry about the phone. He says, don't be surprised if we have success early against Bama. They don't go to Bryce Young just like they did with Tua mid-game. Maybe so. You may be right about that, Devin. I've said I think there's a far more likely chance that Mac Jones is the starter of the game in September, and if these two teams rematch in December, I believe they will. It's far more likely in my mind to be Bryce Young by then. I just think he's a better prospect than Mac Jones is. Jones got some experience. I think he was only okay, not terrible, only okay. I think if Alabama wants to win a national championship, I think you need a better quarterback than Mac Jones. That, for me, would be Bryce Young. Better chance of seeing him in December than seeing him in September, but I believe you're also right. That's enough into the season, 3 weeks worth, that you could make that transition during the game if things are not going well. And certainly that'll invite all kinds of knucklehead comments from the peanut gallery if Alabama goes to the bench for a quarterback again. Boy, I really don't want to hear that. Man, I really don't want to hear that. But I think you're ultimately right that you could see that transition occur during that game. In fact, I think in the game that Alabama lost to Ole Miss in 2015, I believe you saw something similar to that there, where Cooper Bateman started, but essentially Jake Coker ended that game as the Alabama starting quarterback, basically the rest of the season. I may have that slightly misremembered, but that's basically kind of where I thought that was. All right, let's do a couple. We got to really get it. Will Scott said, BA said 5 minutes ago, 13 minutes ago. Yeah, I also had short comments yesterday, so I try to give you all a little bit more. All right, we're going to get ready to go for sure now, though, because we do have things to do, and I want to let people get on about their day. Appreciate y'all being here. Hope you all have a good time. Huge thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews, making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that for you, and you, of course, find them online at rsandrews.com. Also, don't forget to check out ajc.com there as well. Stay up to date. We should have mentioned this during the regular show. So, Emerson Hancock did get drafted yesterday, 6th overall. Cole Wilcox did not. I guess there's a chance that's financially related. A lot of times these baseball players put a big price tag next to their name, and so they end up not getting drafted where you think they might because they've told teams it's going to be expensive to sign them. So you can follow more of that at ajc.com here today there as well. Also, there was some confusion about the difference between, and stay with me for a second, asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic coronavirus cases and who can and cannot spread the disease. Most of this confusion, I believe, came from people who only read headlines as opposed to reading the actual news stories. But if you want to kind of find out more about what the World Health Organization actually said when it comes to how coronavirus can be spread asymptomatically, whatever else, AJC's got a good write-up on that today. You can read that at ajc.com there as well. And that'll about do it. So, yeah, check all that out. Update on the primary elections from earlier this week, kind of how all that shook out and kind of who was able to avoid a primary and who's able to kind of now move on to the general in November. Coverage of that. Really deep bench of political writing there at the AJC. Bluestein, Jim Galloway, a very, very deep roster of political writers. You can follow all of that online at ajc.com. Huge thanks to all of you for being a part of what we're doing here on the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Big thanks to Sock Fancy. 1,000 masks given away this week. I was proud to be a part of that. Check out DawgNation.com. Sign up for the Kroger Father's Day giveaway. And I'll see you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Have a great day, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.